Hey, we are in this series, Rooted, and every week, you've heard me say, we gather into this space, and we do some things. We sing, we worship through singing, we teach through Scripture, we have some sort of invitation towards transformation, and we serve one another, and we live in community. But as we've asked every week, do you ever step back and think, why is it that we do those things? And more than that, why do we think and express and practice it the way we do at Bridge Church? Those are the big questions of this series, and my hope continues to be today to continue to bring some vision and some continuity and unity and even healing from previous experiences around these areas of church life and expression and practice that are prone to becoming divisive and even weaponized. And in the last 3 weeks, we've talked about our thinking and approach to worship. We talked about the Bible. We talked about our thinking and approach to salvation. By the way, again, not transaction, transformation. Mind-blowing, right? A lot of, it was great. But up on the docket today is our view of an approach to serving. Now, from the start, I want you to know that when you think about serving, we think about serving, there are many parts of your life that can immediately apply to. Your family, your work, your kids' school, your neighbors, like personal things. But it can also mean the bigger things that we do together, like Night to Shine, foster care, justice and mercy partnerships throughout our community, throughout the world. But for the sake of clarity and focus this morning, I want you to know that this conversation is going to sit in the space of how you and I express serving one another in the church family. Particularly in this context when it comes to how we express that in our weekly gathering on Sundays. As a church family, biblically speaking, we have let's just express it as a two-sphere responsibility in serving. The first sphere, that is a tongue twister. The first one is to one another. It's to our church family and to all those who show up curious and skeptical and sometimes even hostile to this thing that we're in together. The first sphere of our serving is inward, and that's not selfish, that's biblical, that's strengthening, that's a sign of health, and it's how we create an incubator of community and life that looks outward. But where it can become selfish is if we ignore the second sphere, the next dimension, which is always outward. It's where we serve and host and live as brothers and sisters in a community of mutual love and sacrifice, but it always doesn't look inward. It begins to shift towards an outward focus. And it's wrapped up in this prayer, this vision statement we say a lot, where we want to see the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God in the valley as it is in heaven. And I don't know how you think about this, but let me just put some language to this. When we think about serving our community, which is not the focus necessarily today, I want us to grow. I want you to rethink that we actually have a spiritual responsibility for the well-being of our community. We have a spiritual responsibility, not just a burden, not just an optional thing, not just a if and when or for some. We have a spiritual responsibility for the flourishing and the well-being of our community. And we do that knowing that God has uniquely placed you, and He's placed me, and He's placed this community in a time and space for the people that occupy the same time and space. But again, for the sake of clarity, for brevity today, our focus is going to be towards that inner circle, the one another that we find ourselves in community with in our church family. If you're wondering what that is, look around. It's this, and it's those in different parts of this building right now. Now, if you will remember, one of the recurring themes that has driven the conversation the last few weeks is built out from the idea that bad paradigms or misconceptions about something often lead to bad practices. And often those bad practices can take something beautiful and good and make it divisive and harmful and even hurtful. For example, We talked about how when we get last week, how we get the story of the Bible or the story of the gospel a bit misconstrued, it turns into a transactional approach to salvation rather than something that is transformational. Bad paradigms and misconceptions, they lead to bad practices. So let's plug and play that into the idea of serving. Serving in the church. Bad paradigms and misconceptions. I don't know if this has been your experience, but I feel a hesitancy already in the room like, oh, it's about to get manipulative up in here. It's about to be slick and coercive, and there is going to be sign-up sheets that I didn't know I was showing up for. I feel the doors already locking. They're keeping food for the decorating party. Like, is that to sweat us out a little bit long? Like, chill. That ain't going to happen. That's not what's about to happen. But I feel it in the room. This is not going to be that. The reason I feel that is from the thing I already wrote, that bad paradigms and misconceptions about serving have produced bad practice that have hurt a lot of people. You feel that? You experience that. And maybe you're one of them today. And as soon as you hear me say this, you just tensed up. You're like, oh, I can't leave fast enough. And that's fair. That can be from past experience. And maybe in your experience, we could name a lot of situations. There's been some sort of like spiritually transactionally based exchange of like, you do this, you get this, and we'll all not really get beneath the surface of one another in the meeting, but we'll just do the thing and we'll feel good about it. Maybe that's part of your experience. My brother Jared invented a word a few years ago to kind of take on what used to be a lot of our, just a shared experience for a lot of people. He called it being voluntold. Being voluntold. It's that moment where somehow in the fabric of a church, its culture, or the way leadership functions, you get volunteered for something without ever really participating in that decision, or you attach a bad story of the Bible, like, if I don't serve, I'm going to go to heaven or hell based on how I make this decision. You like transaction, it all stacks, my friends, it all stacks. Or voluntold, it gets communicated to you in such a way that you really don't have a choice. Try this on. And then from there, maybe you have an experience in the past where once you're doing the thing along the journey, like your boundaries start to get compromised, or they get outright ignored, and it feels like the only time someone expresses care or concern for you is right before they have to schedule you or ask you to do something, which makes you feel used and discarded like a cog in some machine. And then after some time, you burn out, and the flame of your passion and purpose that you once carried deep in your heart, thought you were kindling, gets snuffed out by your experience. And you go from the happy-go-lucky outsider to an insider, and all your expectations turn into experiences, and then you find your way buying out instead of buying in. Anyone ever been there? So, I could name a lot more experiences with that, but we don't need to focus on that. There's some shared experiences here. And my point is this. For many of you, somewhere in your past is a lot of hurt and some degree of disillusionment and unmet expectations that are a direct result of saying yes to serving in a church. And one of the reasons behind that, we can name a lot, but one of the reasons behind that we want to get around today and reframe and invite Jesus to heal us from, and maybe give us a step back into the game, if that's what today is about, is that bad paradigms and misconceptions lead to bad practices that hurt people. And we've done a really good job of doing that in the area of serve at a church. And in my estimation, there is a commonly practiced and held bad paradigm that has fed bad practices and experiences around serving in the church for a lot of you. And I take it even further to say that it is often hidden and like an unspoken reality. It's a cause of why many folks who grew up in church are no longer in it. And why some of you might be here attempting to give church another shot, but if you are honest, you're still hesitant. And you've yet to put both feet in. You're here, but not fully. The voice of God's coming through. But you're here, but not fully and not vulnerably yet. And by the way, that's perfectly okay. We exist for that. We exist to meet you where you are. And we're committed to unperfectly being who we say we are and earning your trust along the way over the long haul. You belong here in that. So what is that hidden reality? What is that hidden root level thing that tends to drive hurtful practices of serving in the church? One, it comes from the wrong definition of success in the church. So let me tease it out this way. I was talking to someone this week who is having some trouble with their kid's coach. And believe it or not, they were making a good point. Because parents, we love our children. Coaches, we love the children. But what we all really love, it's just complicated. Coaches love kids. I'm just saying. It's complicated. And his kids play some travel ball, which overall it's like a competitive thing, right? But for his age group, and many of the age groups that are in that, it's supposed to be more about development than about winning. And all that means is that the purpose of the team at that age group is to develop players, give them lots of training, experience, repetition, skill work, and coaching so that they, as individuals, become more competent and more confident players as part of a team where a cool outcome along the way would be to win some games. Am I right? However, this particular coach's approach, as I understood it, seemed to have become primarily geared towards winning with like 7 and 8-year-olds. And instead of coaching to develop the players, he was basically coaching to extract the usefulness out of a few for short-sighted paradigm of success and winning at the grand age of 7 and 8 at the expense of player development. Now, here's the thing. There's a profound difference in coaching to develop players towards like a mutually shared goal that isn't measured solely by winning and losing versus coaching to extract usefulness for like weekend to weekend winning records at age 7. You following? And here's my point. I'm not feeling the angst yet from you. Like, I want you to be mad with me. Like, here's the point. Underneath both of those approaches to coaching is some sort of definition of success that is being expressed in how they coach. Can you see where I'm going with this and how it parallels to some misguided ideas of serving in the church? You probably can. Players are volunteers, coaches are pastors, and teams are the church. But before we resolve that tension, let me drill down another layer. Because that definition of success that drives an approach to coaching and what you measure comes from somewhere deeper. And bad and hurtful practices of serving in the church are not just based on bad definitions of success, they're also based in misconceptions of the very nature of what the church is. So let me ask you about that. It's a question I'm curious if you've ever thought about. What is the church? What is this thing that we show up for? What is this thing that we are connected in? What is this thing that we are painstakingly loving and sacrificing and giving and like attaching eternity to? Like, what is this thing? In its simplest form, what is it? And I'm not sure how you would answer that right now. I could guess, if you came from like most of the shared streams of church that we've come from, I could guess some sort of things that you would say. But Richard Halverson, he was the former chaplain of the U.S. Senate. He once said it this way, and he kind of tracked church history in a way that we've arrived at some point. And we'll follow up from there. But he said that in the beginning, the church was a fellowship of men and women. It was a family centered on the living Christ. And then the church moved to Greece, where it became a philosophy. Then it moved to Rome, where it became an institution. Next, it moved to Europe, where it became a culture. And finally, it moved to America, where it became an enterprise. What is the church? That's not a perfect summary, but it's a helpful one. Why? Here's why. Because I would humbly and again angstily submit to you that generally speaking, our view of success in the church that often precipitates a lot of the ways that we think about serving in the church, sometimes that have directly hurt you, extend from a misconception of the very nature of the church based more so in things like American enterprise corporate values rather than in the values of Jesus and the kingdom. And so, riffing off of something Rich Viotis recently wrote, let me just say this. Churches are not corporations. They're not enterprises. They are not businesses fundamentally. Pastors, I am not a CEO, and you are not potential investors or volunteers in some sort of corporately minded and structured machine. We are a spiritual family. We are the bride of Christ, and I am your shepherd, a teacher, a spiritual leader and director, and in the humblest of ways that I know how to express it without attaching the baggage of your past, I'm the spiritual father of this family, not a CEO. And we together are a community of servants, not volunteers. We need to lose that language and lose the baggage that comes attached to it. At Bridge Church, the sacrificial, loving, community-centered, others-focused way of Jesus will define our future, not the corporate structures of American capitalism and institutional growth models. We must live as interdependent brothers and sisters in a new family, not as independent colleagues in a spiritually domesticated corporation. Your healing and your growth and your unfolding of salvation through transformation is directly tied to whether we live interdependently as family, serving one another and loving one another, or if we decide to take the all too common route to live essentially as independent colleagues in this Sunday product we produce and consume together with little regard to a deeper work of change and healing and hope for us, for our community. When it comes to my role, let's level some expectations for a second, because this is where serving can get wonky too. When it comes to my role in our church family, my role is to live as like this public-facing but humble and grounded and accountable spiritual leader of this family, providing spiritual direction and teaching and shepherding and leadership to our future, a future that gets to be defined by God's plan and our participation in it, not just some ego-driven, self-aggrandizing, self-perpetuating model or vision that I come up with or that we co-opt like a plug-and-play model of foolproof institutional success without regard to our context or community. You feel me? For you, at Bridge Church, your role is not to be a volunteer in a system of programs that we architect in a way that easily slip to being based on like mutually beneficial transactional exchanges that meet your predefined idea of success and our predefined idea of success that has nothing to do with apprentices of Jesus growing as people of love and becoming a multiply movement that our community cannot ignore. There are indicators that we must celebrate, but they are never to be the drivers of our success. And if we stay tuned to the center of apprenticing with Jesus, growth will always extend from health. So it's not an either or. It's not an either or. It's not anti-crowd. It's not anti-learning from corporate. It's not anti-learning structures and good leadership practices. It's always being crystal clear that the nature of who we are that drives our vision of success and drives what we are participating in is living as a family of apprentices of Jesus, practicing the way of Jesus for the sake of others. And if there are practices and ideas and structures and things that can bring influence and to help us make us more effective and help us cast a wider net and a deeper net, I am 1,000% in it, 1,000% for it, and we will be too. And your role is to live as a community of servants, a family. My role, like it's not an us or like my role is just a different vision of serving one another. It's to be a community of servants, a family of brothers and sisters from the youngest to the oldest, living in the direction of one another and our community, where people are being met where they are and being embraced in friendship and finding lifelong connection in this slow process we call apprenticeship with Jesus over the long haul. Is to belong to a team so that others can belong here. Is to make space. It's so that crowds can become community and the community can become family. And we want to serve and validate each level and layer of that journey. It is not to serve a task or an ego or a power trip. It is to be cared for and to be known and to be loved and to be empowered. It's not to find your gifts extracted to feed the machine that is Bridge Church's future. Got a bit angsty. Again, I'm not anti-learning from all the things and drawing the best of the best of the best in development and being leader. I'm not anti any of that. But fundamentally, how you and I define the nature of what we are, if we begin to lean out of anything other than a really messy, imperfect, loving, mutually sacrificial family of apprentices practicing the way of Jesus, when we get outside of that lane as the innermost defining characteristic of who we are, then we will begin to have problems. And we will have practices that lead to unhealthy visions of why we're serving and what we are working on in this thing together for. At our core, we are a family of apprentices practicing the way of Jesus. Jesus himself said that it will be by the way that you and I love one another that the world will know we are his followers. The way we love and serve one another in this room, not abstractly out there, not who might come, not who we agree with, not who's easy to love and serve, but by the way you and I serve one another in the real human faces and complexities that are sitting in front of me today. Y'all remember this picture from last week? Remember this? Had something to define about our approach to orienting people towards Jesus. One of the questions that parallels to this conversation today is to ask, obviously, how does that process even get started? That's nice. It's very abstract. There's no human face. There's no difficulty. There's no difference in class or ethnicity or religious belief or sexuality belief. Like none of those things. This is just a nice graphic on a screen. But humanize it. Make it your enemy. Make it your political adversary. Make it your, annoying person. Thinks, acts, talks differently than you. That's sitting in the room. Don't look at them. Stop. Don't look. But how does that process get started? What makes this truly a place, a culture, a web, a community, an interdependent family that is sticky for that to happen? What holds someone's attention long enough for their curiosity to continue to be met? Well, imagine with me. Imagine that more than great teaching, great facilities, and great kids, and coffee, and great worship, and student ministries, and all the things that, by the way, are no less important than they were 3 minutes ago when I said all that I said. Imagine with me what it would be like for someone to walk through these doors or get connected to you in real life outside of this place, and that it was the defining thing that began and made that journey sticky was by the way that you and I loved and served one another. Not in the sort of things we can produce together. And they're both important, but hear me. The most fundamental expression of our fundamental essence as a family must be that people get to be relationally connected to us by serving and by loving. What if that was so unignorable that people walk in here and they walk into the dimension of your life and they expect one thing and all they find is, man, these people really care for each other. They really love each other. They're really curious about one another's lives. Like not in a weird way and not in a hostile way and not in a religious way. They're just really patient. They really are patient. I think I can find some safety in this. I think I can find some trust in this. I think that maybe this is the sort of context that I can heal from my hurt. What if these people required nothing of me other than my full self? And what if the starting point for how transformation in the kingdom of God finds its way into the core of our church begins, that's the process, but what if it begins by the way we love and the way we serve one another? Big what if. So let me start to bring this together and shape how these big questions and themes that we're asking together, that they come to some sort of clarity through the lens of serving and how that shapes our approach. Let me take you to Matthew 13 to get us there. Matthew 13, Jesus, picture it. He's standing in front of like a pretty big crowd. He's standing on a boat in water with people around just listening. And that crowd is full of people who are not in a good spot. They are bringing some brokenness. They are bringing some hurt. They're under Roman occupation. Their ancestral lands and customs are being domesticated and trampled on and outright stolen. But in their imagination, that's the reality. But in their imagination are the stories of old, stories from the Tanakh, the Old Testament. They're in a waiting period because in their stories is some unfulfilled promise that someone would come and be their king and liberate them and set them free. They wanted what they did not know they needed yet. They wanted a king to rid them of their political oppression, to reestablish their people in the place of power. And they're starting to get curious about this guy named Jesus of Nazareth who's now standing in front of them teaching. And he's telling parables, and he's meeting them where they are, and he's invoking so much curiosity. And it is to those people with that experience and that mindset and that moment in history that he begins to introduce the idea of the kingdom of heaven. Now, the second they hear the word kingdom coming from that context, what do you think their mind, very human, would go to? They're thinking, all right, this might be the guy that comes up and rids us of the Roman king and that whole system. That's not what he's saying. And he's speaking about his kingdom and the coming kingdom that he is ushering in. And to do that, he begins to challenge their minds and speak to the context, and he tells them this parable. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants, and it becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Now imagine this dude that you're like, he is about to overthrow all of our enemies, comes in and is like, no, I'm bringing in a kingdom. And he says, it's like a mustard seed. What does that even mean, Jesus? What do you even mean? And just for clarity, mustard seed is like tiny. It is little. It's just like a little precious egg. So that thing might have like infinite value. Like a little egg, it's a bad farm joke. Chicken eggs are too overpriced right now. It just looks like an egg to me sitting on a finger, like a little miniature egg. Anyways, now I ruined it, but it's a mustard seed. It's like the size of a mustard seed. So knowing what you know, picture it. The captivated audience is listening to this guy. They're listening to Jesus of Nazareth. They're curious. They don't know the end of the story like we do. They don't know what he's coming in to bring, but he's talking about a kingdom, and that's pretty cool. They're hoping he's going to rid them of their oppressor. And he starts to talk about his kingdom, but then he starts comparing it to a mustard seed. Not an army, not an offensive, not power, not political persuasion, not a strong philosophy or a Roman god, not an insurrection movement, a mustard seed. And it doesn't really seem like his explanation is matching their expectation, does it? So what's he doing? In comparing the kingdom of heaven to a mustard seed, he is outright challenging their view of greatness. He's challenging their view of success. He's challenging their view of the very nature of the kingdom of God and their role and identity in that kingdom. And so when you and I, here's the point I want to make, when you and I talk about the nature of our church and our future together and our definition of success and how that shapes how we live and sacrificially serve one another, we have to make sure that it is based on Jesus' definition of greatness that is shaping our practice, not our surrounding cultures or our selfish definitions of greatness. Because in the default setting of the valley that we occupy, it's the force that is counterforming us away from the way of Jesus. Greatness looks like being served. But defined by the way of Jesus, greatness looks like serving others. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 20. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over him. This is before he rails at them for being Pharisees and hypocrites and calls them a brood of vipers. Jesus is like, you want to talk about angst? Matthew 20, read that one. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Greatness for us needs to be defined by Jesus and his way and the values of the kingdom. And it needs to be about becoming someone else's ladder rather than climbing the ladder at someone else's expense. The kingdom is like a mustard seed, and it challenges our notions of greatness. But that's not all. Look back at this text again. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants, and it becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Mustard seed, okay, you're challenging my notions of greatness and success. Then he says, a man took and planted in his field, small, grows, matures, it transforms, it becomes like a big tree, and it doesn't just occupy space, people come and benefit from it. Birds come and find rest. They come and find shade. The growth is so that someone else can come and be benefited, cared for, belong, love, accepted. Just put the branch out there and say, come on. So check this out. All of the potential for that tiny seed to become a powerful tree, all the potential for kingdom success and kingdom greatness is already in that tiny mustard seed, right? All of the possibility, all of the power, it's already there in the mustard seed. And the mustard seed starts tiny. But then Jesus says from that mustard seed, it grows and it becomes the largest of plants. Small, track that, small to big, humble beginnings, proper motives, success of kingdom proportions. Are you tracking? But look at the text closely again. Well, this isn't in my notes, but one of the things we can really hyper-spiritualize in church world is smallness. And so we'll take a text like, we will over-spiritualize, well, because we're small, we must be right. Or because we're small, you know what I'm saying? We can hyper-spiritualize just being lazy and not taking the passion that's in our hearts and doing something with it. That's just a sidebar. So don't fall for that religious trap. Don't hyper-spiritualize smallness and don't hyper-spiritualize bigness. All I'm saying is Jesus says the kingdom is like a mustard seed that grows. But there's a line, something that came between, there was a missing link between the potential, the kingdom potential, and kingdom growth. It's found in this phrase, a man took and planted in his field. A man took and planted in his field. Meaning what? And before the theologians in the room are like, oh no, you're about to make it your work. It's all God's work. He does this stuff. But he gives us the seed and says, go plant it. There's a human dimension involved in what separates kingdom potential and all the Jesus stuff from just a wasted opportunity. And that wasted opportunity, the defining factor between wasted opportunity and kingdom potential is people doing the work. It's joining their effort and their whole life to God's power. God is not about just you serving on a team at our church. He's after your whole life. And part of how that gets expressed is mutually loving and serving one another. Maybe the starting point for your curiosity in your relationship is just to join a team, throw caution to the wind, and do that. That might be your journey. I don't advise that, but that might be your journey. What I advise is getting in community. Talking to people, working that. So let's bring this back together and say this. Our definition of success has to be wrapped up in seeing the mustard seeds of the kingdom potential that exist inside of you and then collectively exist inside of us be expressed through our serving and our loving one another. as a family of apprentices practicing the way of Jesus. Our vision of greatness starts small. This is small. This is nothing yet. Not to devalue you and not to devalue this moment. But if the kingdom is like a mustard seed, man, and if there's a huge need outside of this place, and if there's still a lot of need that has not yet been expressed to one another because of community and humility and vulnerability, we're just getting started. It's a mustard seed. Start small, but because of the very nature of who we are and what we're doing and how we express it in love, it has unlimited kingdom potential with the power to literally change and transform your life and the lives of the people in our community. And in a word, what that looks like is movement. That potential can become a movement as we get our hands dirty in cultivating the seed that God has given each one of us and the seed that is Bridge Church. Planting it, cultivating, create healthy root system, the container, and loving one another in that effort. And all of that has to be and will be, and unapologetically, with some apology to the ways we've messed it up, including myself in different moments of leadership here, that is what has to drive our view of and practice of serving. What is the church? It's a family, yes, but it's also a movement. You are here because an ancient group of people gathered around a rabbi, and from 3 to 12 to bigger crowds to in one place in time on earth to all over planet Earth throughout thousands of years, it's reached you. And you're sitting in this room. That's crazy. It's craziness. That's actually kind of crazy. Before the internet, before smartphones, before planes, trains, automobiles, and Superman, the message of Jesus got everywhere. That's crazy. How? Because the church is a movement, is uncontainable kingdom power that begins in the form of mustard seeds. And Bridge Church, we're part of that. There's a really fundamental question in front of us. And this is the question. Will it stop here? Will it stop here? And will we only be concerned about passing it off to our closest friends and to our own children? Or will we be part of a movement that reshapes the very community and region and state that we live in? Why is it? And I know it's complicated. Believe me, I will overanalyze this to death. But why is it that we are sitting in a community and in a state that is unbelievably ravished by poverty, by an opioid crisis, and by all kinds of things, And we have to resist the urge just to be content that it's reached us, it's too hard, it's complicated. Bury the mustard seed, don't water it. Bury it. Church is a movement. Question is, will it stop here? And a movement always happens when you and I take our apprenticeship to Jesus seriously. And when we do that, it changes us. It changes people around us. And it's what happens when every ounce of our church, how we think and how we practice things, aligns our systems and our structures and our sense of success towards living to see the mustard seeds become unignorable powerhouses of kingdom potential and movement. Close kind of with this. I want to illustrate it in a particular way. I enjoy reading, mainly listening to biographies. Any of you love biographies? Reading, listening, watching. All of you that love true crime series, you're in that category, by the way. But you love reading and listening to biographies and what? Anyways, one of the reasons I love biographies is because I really love reading and thinking about the type of people and conditions and situations that come together by which history gets shaped. It's a powerful thing to think about. The river of life is flowing, and then all of a sudden, this group and this person just wedges. And it's a new potential. It's a new trajectory. That happens. You can look at it through history. How do people or groups of people come together to drive history forward and just evoke unignorable change for the good of the world? And one of the things I've learned repeatedly in reading these biographies is that all the attention tends to go to the people up front, right? the face of a company, the face of a church, the people on a stage. Think of someone like Steve Jobs as an example. But really, like all the movement and the way that Apple, for better or worse, has transformed and is transforming the world belongs, or we can blame the people that are sacrificing behind the scenes. He's not here anymore yet. Has Apple had a single miss or loss? No. There's a myth. There's a myth of the heroic individual. And in the church, it's no different. Because the reality is, when you get behind the scenes of all movements throughout history, or any great accomplishment, it's not one great person. It's usually a team of really committed, sacrificial people pushing things forward. And I think that's important as you and I think about our future and this sort of disciple-making, community-changing, church-planting, multi-generational movement we want to become. Because let me tell you something. We can build a decent church, a good church, on the public gifts of a few people and a small hidden core group of people serving unrelentingly on the verge of burnout and angst behind the scenes. All movements are built by people coming together with a deep commitment to the kingdom of God. So we can create a good church. We can do decent. Like we're there. But we're not a movement. We haven't begun to at all realize our potential. We've yet to tilt the plane towards development versus just little wins along the way. And I'm all for the wins. Great. It's fantastic. I think our church is at a pretty decently pivotal moment. Will we be a good church built on the gifts of a few public-facing people and a small core of servant leaders behind the scenes? Or do we want to, each of us, bring our mustard seeds together and see a kingdom movement take root in our hearts and express itself first to one another and then to our communities that in ways that we have yet to dream? And this is the more angsty. It's not guilt, it's passion. And we can love each other still. For some of you, you're here, and you're all in. You're behind the scenes. You're in public. You're at the core. You just need to stay the course. You know who you are. Keep loving, keep serving, keep going. For some of you, your next step is not to get involved yet. You're not there yet. And we will lovingly walk that journey with you as long as that takes. But for some of you, you've been living off the sacrificial commitment of someone else's commitment for a long time. And it's time to plant your own seed, get your mustard seed down in the dirt, cultivate it, get it connected to some other, bear your own fruit, and get in the game. How do we measure success? Mustard seeds, movement, challenging the paradigm, none of which is possible without expressing love and commitment to each other. And what that looks like is day in and day out commitment to loving and serving one another sacrificially. On Sundays as part of teams, and to our kids and our students, and to the thousands of other expressions it can take on. But at its heart, it looks like creating environments and spaces and relationships of belonging so that as people set the trajectory of their life towards Jesus and they believe in him, they have a community to become like Jesus in, because no one becomes like Jesus in isolation. It looks like the long haul. It looks like being concerned with development, not performance. It looks like sacrificial commitment. It looks like loyal friendships. It looks like making an invisible and often intangible kingdom and God visible and tangible through real people. It looks like serving, not out of guilt, but out of deep conviction to love. Not transactionally, but transformationally. Not for personal returns, but out of personal sacrifice with nothing to prove. Not for outcomes, but for what happens in the process, the relational journey. Not out of self-righteousness, but out of a love and desire to see mustard seeds everywhere. Not for a pastor, but for your spiritual family and community. And not to ease your conscience, but to empower your heart and line it all up. You and I, as we apprentice with Jesus, we get to serve. We get to help people find hope. We get to help people belong. We get to share the beauty and the tragedy that is friendship. Serving is how we help others belong, and it's how we love another. And it is from those humble beginnings that your mustard seed and my mustard seeds can be planted in some fertile soil. And before you know it, we'll be part of an unexplainable movement of hope and healing and community and purpose and love the Valley has never seen. What kind of church do we want to become? One of the hardest things in front of you is to believe that you have it. Great concept. Love it, Matt. You have that in you. By the power of the Holy Spirit, by the fact that He made you, you have that in you. Maybe the greatest distance that some of you have to travel in your apprenticeship to Jesus is to believe who Jesus already says you are. To believe who He already says you are, and to believe that your life can matter, and that your life can have purpose, and that your life can be bigger than what it feels like right now. And that in serving one another's needs, you might find your needs come to healing. And in participating in the transformation of someone else, you might find yourself slowly changing and transformation. All of you have that mustard seed potential inside of you. What are you waiting for? What are you afraid of? A couple months ago, years ago, our alarm went off in the middle of the night. The alarm company calls. I'm walking down in my skivvies, and they call my phone. Before I checked out the house, they're like, "Hey, Mr. Davis, we hear there's an emergency. Everything okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I'm sure it's a false alarm," but I didn't know yet. I still had to go clear the house. Dumb mistake. But I'm walking down, and I grab my gun out of the closet, which in hindsight's, really far away. Anyways, it was a whole thing. I'm like, do I remember how to use this thing or not? I hope I don't want to shoot someone right now. I don't want to shoot anybody. I'm a pretty nonviolent person. I have strong thoughts on that. But anyways, guess I got to protect my family. And I'm walking around, and in my brain, I'm like, do I do it? Do I not do it? Do I know it? And I'm like, I'm not afraid to use it if I have to. I'm not afraid to use it. I'm not afraid to use it. And as cheesy as that is and unplanned as this illustration is, y'all have a mustard seed. Y'all got that potential. We've got the potential. Don't be afraid to use it. I'm not afraid to use it. Are you? And what's holding you back? What sort of things can we live into together and heal from and be inspired for so that we can see a kingdom movement blossom in this place? The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants, and it becomes a tree so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Bridge Church is like a mustard seed, which a community, a family of people apprenticing with Jesus planted and worked the soil and loved and served and forgave and healed and repurposed their life. Yet it grew and it became something unexplainable. It became something bigger than their wildest imagination. And their expectation became all the things that at one point were dreams. And they did that so that broken and hurting and divided and angry and hostile people from all walks of life, and questions and affiliations and thoughts could come and find shade, find rest, find community, find a place to belong so that their journey could be mapped through the very individual, the very painful, the very healing, the very real journey that is apprenticeship to Jesus as a real human. Not to fulfill something, anything other than to become a person of love in the way of Jesus by the power of the Spirit and through the sacrifice of His Son as part of God's massive redemptive plan for you and the world. Will we become a decent, good church, or will we get our hands dirty as a family to join our human capacity and effort to a wholehearted God that wants to catalyze a movement here for the sake of our community and for the sake of you and for the sake of the next generation and for the sake of the lost and the last and the least and the marginalized and the ignored? Let that give shape to why and how we serve. Would you stand? Jesus, your kingdom is like a mustard seed. It grows, it has potential, yet we are involved And God, wherever this meets us where we are today, whether this stirred up past hurt and question and angst, meet us there. Bring us to healing and clarity and the vulnerability to be honest about our experience. If it met us in a place of, you know what, I've been sitting on the sidelines for a while, I've got to get in the game. And I don't feel guilted, I actually feel inspired. And this reminds me of that love that I once held that somehow had been lost or stolen from me, or an experience dulled the joy of serving and participating in God's kingdom. God, would you renew that vision and that heart for people and for love and for serving and for a future in the church? God, for those that find themselves on the outside looking in, and they're like, who are these weird people talking about serving one another and loving one another? How are they ever to do that? Why does it matter? God, would you just help us to be a place where all those questions can be met and found by loving, gentle people that have nothing to prove other than we are honestly trying to become who we already are in Jesus. God, I pray that you'll help us, Jesus, to see Bridge Church become just this unbelievable overlap of the power of the kingdom of God on earth and in our community. That this will be a place where you pour out your Spirit to our hearts, where you help us to rethink and reshape our lives and to heal and become purposeful in every ounce of our lives. God, that we will never become religious in that effort, but we will never compromise our convictions, and we will never put the target on things that are anything outside of what you are calling us to do. God, would you give us discernment and wisdom and love and humility and conviction throughout the whole thing. And God, for all those that are watching or in the room and they just need to feel loved, they need to be seen, they need to feel valued, they need to be served, would you help waken up the eyes of our hearts towards them today, towards them in the coming days, and help them to know that you see them, you love them, you've never lost your eye towards them. And that maybe the measure of who you are is found in your unrelenting pursuit of our hearts. So God, meet us where we are and help us to feel loved and to live loved and to grow in our love towards you, to ourselves, towards others. And may this place, may Bridge Church be a catalyst of kingdom movement and momentum and healing and change and transformation for the sake of everyone and for the sake of us. May our kids grow up in a context where they don't have to look around very far to find, hey, these people are who they say they are. These people are serving. These people are loving. They are imperfect, but they are giving it with their guts, and I can track with that. Help us to create healthy containers of love and community and service to one another, and help us to give our whole lives to you and to shed the false self and begin to walk in the true newness of who we are in you. God, we love you. We thank you, and we pray in your name. All God's people said.